Mediterranean Shield. Russian fleet attempts to dominate the Mediterranean. NATO says no. One American carrier strike group backed by allies proves Russian naval ambitions end where Sixth Fleet begins. Russian naval presence in Mediterranean increased dramatically over past decade. Permanent flotilla based at Tartus, Syria. Regular deployments of Slava-class cruisers, Udaloy-class destroyers, and Kilo-class submarines. Naval aviation operating from Syrian air bases. This represents Russian attempt to establish sustained naval presence in waters they haven't controlled since Cold War ended. Russian military leadership views Mediterranean presence as symbol of restored great power status and practical capability to influence Middle Eastern affairs through military force projection. American Sixth Fleet views Russian presence as manageable irritant that becomes intolerable when Russia attempts to restrict NATO naval operations or threaten alliance member states through military intimidation. USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group deploys to Eastern Mediterranean with mission that's diplomatic on surface, but unmistakably military underneath. Demonstrate that Mediterranean remains NATO-dominated waters regardless of Russian flotilla presence or regional ambitions. The message to Moscow is clear without being explicitly stated. Russia can maintain naval presence through our tolerance, but cannot exclude NATO operations or threaten alliance members without facing overwhelming response that Russian Mediterranean Squadron cannot survive. Navy Power TV takes you inside the confrontation that reestablishes traditional power dynamics after years of Russian attempts to challenge NATO maritime control through military presence and aggressive naval operations. Which capability gives NATO decisive Mediterranean advantage? A. American carrier aviation. B. Allied submarine forces. C. Integrated air defense network. Comment your answer. Russian naval squadron comprises significant combat power for regional operations. Slava-class cruiser Moskva serves as flagship carrying 16 P-1000 Vulcan anti-ship missiles. 2 Udaloy-class destroyers provide anti-submarine capability and additional anti-ship missiles. 3 improved Kilo-class submarines operate submerged in Eastern Mediterranean. 2 Grigorovich-class frigates carry Kalibor cruise missiles. Supporting vessels include fleet oiler, salvage tug, and intelligence collection ship. This force represents approximately 20% of Russian Navy's operational capability, concentrated in single theater. On paper, it looks formidable. In practice, it faces NATO alliance that can concentrate forces an order of magnitude larger with technological advantages across every warfare domain. The USS Truman Carrier Strike Group includes 2 Ticonderoga-class cruisers, 4 Arleigh-Burke-class destroyers, and 2 Virginia-class attack submarines. 75 combat aircraft embark on Truman, including FA-18EF Super Hornets, EA-18G Growlers, E-2D Hawkeyes, and MH-60 helicopters. This single carrier strike group possesses more combat capability than entire Russian Mediterranean squadron. But NATO doesn't rely on American forces alone. French carrier Charles de Gaulle operates in Western Mediterranean with its air wing including Rafale fighters. Italian Navy contributes Horizon-class destroyers with advanced air defense systems. Spanish frigates patrol Gibraltar approaches. Greek submarines monitor Russian vessels transiting from Black Sea. British Astute-class submarines track Russian submarines. Turkish Navy controls Bosphorus access that Russian vessels must transit for reinforcement or resupply. This is alliance naval power that Russia cannot match through numbers or technology. Stay with me because what happens next demonstrates why alliance naval cooperation creates capability exponentially greater than some of individual national contributions. Russian Su-30 fighters based at Khmeimim Air Base in Syria conduct aggressive intercepts of NATO maritime patrol aircraft. These intercepts involve dangerous flying, including close approaches and unprofessional maneuvers designed to intimidate NATO air crews and assert Russian control over airspace above international waters. NATO tolerates this behavior initially as routine great power competition. But tolerance ends when Russian fighter comes within 3 meters of American P-8 Poseidon, causing near collision that endangers both aircraft. American response demonstrates why escalation against NATO forces is strategically unwise for Russia. FA-18E Super Hornets launch from USS Truman to escort subsequent P-8 patrol missions. The Super Hornets carry full air-to-air loadout and operate with orders to defend NATO aircraft against any threats, including aggressive Russian intercepts. Russian Su-30s approach the next American P-8 mission. They find 4 Super Hornets flying formation with the patrol aircraft. The Russian pilots recognize they're outmatched in both numbers and capability. They maintain safe distance. The aggressive intercepts stop immediately. NATO air crews continue operations without interference. This is how credible military capability enforces professional behavior more effectively than diplomatic protests. How many NATO submarines track Russian vessels in Mediterranean? A. 2 submarines. B. 5 submarines. C. 8+ submarines. Answer at end. Russian cruiser Moskva activates its Voskhod radar to track NATO aircraft operating near the carrier group. This is standard intelligence collection activity. American electronic warfare systems record the radar characteristics for signals intelligence database. But when Moskva activates its top dome fire control radar that guides anti-ship missiles, NATO interprets this as potentially hostile act. American response is immediate and overwhelming. EA-18G Growler activates its jamming pod targeting Moskva's radar systems. Powerful jamming corrupts radar returns, making target tracking impossible. The Moskva's sensors are effectively blinded while American jamming continues. Russian crew has choice: shut down radars and cease threatening behavior, or keep radars active while accomplishing nothing due to jamming. They choose to shut down. The implicit message is received clearly. NATO possesses electronic warfare capability that can neutralize Russian sensors whenever alliance leadership decides Russian actions warrant defensive response. Navy Power TV reveals the capability gap that makes Russian Mediterranean presence dependent on NATO tolerance rather than Russian military capability to operate independently. If NATO decided to neutralize Russian Squadron, the operation would succeed within hours. Russian forces know this. NATO knows this. The mutual understanding creates stability through acknowledged superiority rather than rough parity. Russian Kilo-class submarines attempt to track American carrier. These diesel-electric boats are capable submarines in confined waters. But they face NATO anti-submarine warfare network that includes multiple layers of detection and prosecution capability. American P-8 Poseidon aircraft deploy sonar buoys across Mediterranean, creating acoustic surveillance network that detects submarine movements at ranges where submarines cannot effectively evade. British Astute-class submarine HMS Audacious tracks Russian submarines using passive sonar that detects Russian boats without revealing British submarines' position. French Rubis-class submarines monitor eastern Mediterranean approaches from Syrian coast. Italian anti-submarine helicopters deploy from destroyers to prosecute contacts detected by Allied sensors. The Russian submarines are tracked continuously by multiple NATO platforms. Their attempts at covert operations fail because NATO possesses comprehensive anti-submarine warfare capability that Russia cannot defeat with current submarine quieting technology. Quantity versus quality demonstrates stark asymmetry when quality includes multiple Allied submarine forces with superior sonar and comprehensive maritime patrol aircraft coverage, while quantity means handful of diesel submarines that must snorkel regularly and cannot maintain covert operations against determined opposition with technological advantages. Comment Q or L. If you believe NATO alliance naval power is unstoppable in Mediterranean, type Navy Power TV right now. Russian cruiser Moskva experiences engineering casualties during operations. Propulsion problems force reduced speed and eventual towing back to Tartus by fleet tug. This incident illustrates Russian Navy's persistent readiness challenges. Their vessels suffer equipment failures at rates far exceeding NATO standards due to maintenance backlogs, aging equipment, and insufficient funding for spare parts and systematic modernization programs. NATO vessels maintain operational tempo without equivalent reliability problems because their navies invest in sustained maintenance and continuous modernization that keeps equipment functioning reliably throughout operational service life. The contrast between NATO readiness and Russian maintenance challenges creates operational advantage beyond pure combat capability. NATO can surge forces and maintain sustained presence. Russian Navy struggles to keep current Mediterranean squadron operational. Any attempt to reinforce or expand Russian Mediterranean presence would stress their logistics and maintenance capacity beyond sustainable levels. This is how industrial base advantages and defense budget disparities create strategic effects that matter as much as individual platform capabilities. French Rafale fighters from Charles de Gaulle coordinate with American Super Hornets for combined NATO air operations. The interoperability demonstrates alliance advantage that Russia cannot replicate. NATO forces train together regularly. They use compatible communication systems and tactical procedures refined through decades of combined operations. Russian forces operate alone because Russia has no allies willing to integrate their naval forces into Russian command structures. This alliance versus isolated power asymmetry multiplies NATO capability while leaving Russia dependent on its own limited resources. Italian Horizon-class destroyers integrate into air defense network with American Aegis cruisers through NATO. Data links. One ship's radar can cue another ship's missiles, creating combined defensive capability that neither nation could achieve alone. Russian vessels lack this level of integration with each other, let alone with potential allies. Chinese Navy operates different systems and doctrines. Russian Navy cannot create equivalent combined defensive networks because they lack both the allies and the technical standards that enable deep integration of sensors and weapons across multiple platforms from different nations. Which element of NATO naval power is most significant? Alliance coordination, American carrier capability, or advanced technology? Drop assessment. Greek submarines monitor Russian vessel movements through Aegean Sea. Any reinforcement from Black Sea must transit Turkish Straits where Turkey controls passage and can deny access if NATO requests. Then those vessels must traverse Greek territorial waters where Greek Navy maintains comprehensive surveillance. Russian reinforcement of Mediterranean Squadron faces geographic chokepoints controlled by NATO allies who can delay or deny passage based on alliance decisions. This geographic advantage makes Russian Mediterranean presence entirely dependent on NATO, allowing them access through waters alliance members control. Technology supremacy confirmed backed by alliance advantage that multiplies capability. The answer to our quiz: at least 8 NATO submarines track Russian vessels in Mediterranean. British Astute-class boats, French attack submarines, Italian boats, Greek submarines, Spanish submarines, American Virginia-class boats. This comprehensive submarine presence means every Russian surface vessel is tracked continuously by multiple NATO submarines that could engage them if hostilities commenced. Russian submarines are similarly tracked by NATO anti-submarine warfare forces that maintain contact without revealing tracking platform positions. Russian Navy operates in Mediterranean, knowing they're under constant surveillance by opponents who possess technological and numerical advantages they cannot overcome. Can Russia expand Mediterranean presence to challenge NATO control? Current evidence suggests no. Geographic choke points controlled by NATO. Alliance naval forces outnumber Russian capability by order of magnitude. Technology gaps favor NATO across all warfare domains. Russian maintenance and logistics challenges prevent sustained, high-tempo operations. The strategic reality facing Russian naval planners is uncomfortable but undeniable. Mediterranean operations exist because NATO allows them to exist, not because Russia possesses capability to operate independently against alliance opposition. Turkish control of Bosphorus Strait provides NATO with ultimate leverage over Russian Mediterranean presence. All Russian vessels must transit Turkish territorial waters to reach Mediterranean from their Black Sea bases. Turkey, as NATO member, can close this access if alliance consensus supports such action. Russian vessels trapped in Mediterranean without access to Black Sea bases would face logistics crisis within weeks. Their fuel supplies would deplete. Their food stores would exhaust. Their maintenance requirements would exceed what Tartus facility can provide. NATO doesn't need to sink Russian vessels to neutralize their Mediterranean presence. Simply closing Bosphorus access would achieve same strategic effect while avoiding escalation risks associated with direct combat. Russian awareness of this vulnerability constrains their Mediterranean operations. They cannot risk actions that might trigger Turkish denial of strait access. This gives NATO implicit veto over Russian Mediterranean activities, regardless of what military capabilities Russian Squadron might theoretically possess. The geographic disadvantage cannot be overcome through military technology or tactical prowess. Location matters in naval warfare, and Russia's geographic position makes Mediterranean operations perpetually vulnerable to NATO control of critical chokepoints. Economic implications compound Russian strategic challenges. Maintaining Mediterranean Squadron costs Russia approximately $500 million annually. This includes fuel, maintenance, crew salaries, and operational expenses. Russia's total naval budget approaches $10 billion annually. Mediterranean operations consume 5% of entire naval budget while producing minimal strategic value beyond symbolic presence. NATO members collectively spend over $300 billion annually on naval forces. The economic asymmetry makes sustained competition impossible for Russia. They cannot match NATO spending. They cannot maintain equivalent presence. They cannot achieve technological parity. Every year the gap widens as NATO continues investing in modernization, while Russian Navy struggles with aging equipment and insufficient funding for systematic fleet renewal. What's next for Mediterranean security? Continued American Sixth Fleet presence backed by NATO alliance that maintains overwhelming naval superiority, preventing Russian expansion or intimidation of alliance members, regardless of Russian regional ambitions, or attempts to project power beyond their current limited capability in eastern Mediterranean waters. The operational lessons from this confrontation influence Russian naval strategy globally. Mediterranean experience demonstrates they cannot compete with NATO alliance that possesses overwhelming advantages in numbers, technology, geography, and economic resources. Similar dynamics exist in Baltic Sea, where Russian Navy faces even more constrained geography and stronger NATO presence. The pattern repeats across multiple theaters. Russian naval presence exists where NATO tolerates it, but cannot survive against determined alliance opposition. Subscribe to Navy Power TV, where elite naval power meets cutting-edge technology, proving NATO alliance naval superiority maintains Mediterranean as Euro-Atlantic security space, where Russian presence exists through NATO tolerance, not Russian capability to operate independently against alliance opposition. Superior fleets, advanced weapons, allied cooperation. Hit notification for analysis showing why American Sixth Fleet backed by NATO allies creates maritime dominance that Russia cannot challenge with current fleet capability, or foreseeable expansion plans given budget constraints and geographic disadvantages.